I am really thankful for this opportunity. I consider this a privilege, and often I've come to realize that critical elements are very important in life. I think what Gajendra and Akhil are doing in terms of managing the slides so flawlessly decidedly deserves a mention and a little bit of an applaud, because so today I really want to talk to you about inflection points. And before I do that, I want to kind of preface this with certain caveats. This is not about a major transformational journey. I'm not going to tell you about a leprechaun that's really holding on to a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Between the sublime and the mundane, I've really decided to focus on the mundane. My belief is that in everyday events, in happenstance and serendipity, a lot of interesting things happen which are really inflection points, and that lead to a dream. If some of you read The Little Prince, it's an interesting book, it's a great parable, and I decided to take this picture that these small inflection points, these small happenstances very often define life the way we know it. I've decided not to really adopt a pedagogical approach and tell you major inspirational stories, but I've taken to heart this whole concept of untold chronicle and share with you some of my innermost experiences. Some of you who are math nerds here or people who are word Nazis would like to know that inflection point is really a mathematical term, a differential equation, where a concave graph changes to a convex. But bottom line being, those are those inflection points where we change from what we are about. We had the first speaker who talked about his dream with Anna Hazare. We heard from Lalita about what really changed her from a lady of affluence to a lady of substance. So let me tell you about this story where I was growing up in Kolkata. My father was a doctor with the Indian Railways. We lived in a decent apartment in the Indian Railways colony. And during this time, my uncle, who used to live in London, had sent me a picture book, a coffee table book. I can vividly remember it was green matted cover with a dusty jacket. And when I leafed through that, I saw these pastoral pictures. I saw beautiful homes. I saw scenery of the basic essence of season. Amongst us Bengalis, we wax eloquent about seasons. We call it Grisho, Shorotkal, summer, autumn. But it's not as resplendent as the pictures were to be. So I must have been all of 5 years old then. And in some way or form, in a very sketchy way, I had thought that that is where I'm going to make my home. It may have been buttressed by the fact that we would have guests come over wearing overcoats, showing us boring slides of them standing in front of cars. But for a 5-year-old, that was an inflection point. This is where I live now. I live in Princeton, New Jersey. It isn't very appealing now after lovely Pune weather. I'm going to go back to a place which is colder than Mars. But that's the choice that I've made. One of the more enduring images that I have of my father, and I shall liberally talk about him only because he just passed away this July 10th. I used to often see him poring over these timetables, which were these almanacs with fluorescent colored train schedules, green and pink and oranges. Some of you may not even remember that. He would clearly think about, if you were going to Shimla, when does the Kalka mail reach Kalka and change from broad gauge to narrow gauge? We would talk, detailed conversations would be about how do we travel from Kolkata to Chennai, and once we land, will we have enough time to go and see Rameshwaram, come back, and then take the train to Kanyakumari. During these visits, and again, some of you may or may not know, Bengalis have perfected budget wanderlust. Wherever you go in smaller parts of India, very often in a budget tourist spot, you're going to see Bengalis wearing horrendous sweaters and trying to convince you that they know everything about tourism. So during these visits, we used to visit New Delhi. I used to like the crisp winter weather. I used to like the fact that people were much better turned out sartorially. And during this time, I started going to some of our relatives' home where they lived at GK1 and GK2, Greater Kailash 1 and Greater Kailash 2. And what I was taken up, I must have been again all of 9 years old, what I was really taken up was the fact that they used to have these beautiful glass panel. It would open up into a lovely green patch of little lawn. They would have their tea or coffee or breakfast. And very recently, I architected and designed a home in Bangalore. And the first thing that I did, I repeat, the first thing that I insisted with my architect was I needed a large panel door which should open out to a green patch of lawn. This is after 47 years. A thought that had germinated or which was a will sprung in a 9-year-old turned out to be as important for him that he had to bring it out of the system. Those, my friends, are inflection points. I've come to realize, and that's really why I was so keen that I come here, this was more for me than you, that I think it's extremely important that we absolutely sensitize ourselves about these inflection points and ensure that we are perpetually catching some of these drift. Again, my father moved from the Indian Railways to the port. We were in Gujarat, small town, and the highlight of our weekends used to be we used to get invited to a ship. We'd be hosted by the ship captain. In one of those evenings or soirees, I came across a dusty National Geographic book. It was about silicon. It was about the fact that very plain sand was changing world. This was circa 72, 74. There was a picture of Cupertino looking down into a lighted valley. Again, a lot of things were coming together. The desire to be in a splendid country with great weather or seasons. This aspect of trying to work with people in different areas. And finally, it cemented that I wanted to be in computers. That led me to try and do engineering with computer engineering and electrical. And that is something that I have come to believe is extremely important, everything that we do in our lives. Again, when I was doing my engineering and MBA, we used to have these CEOs. They were state CEOs. They would say what is required to be said. We talked about capitalization and what have you. But one man struck me to be a little different, Gurcharan Das. He was the CEO of Richardson Wicks at that time. I think he rose up to be the CEO of Procter & Gamble later. And he, I got to read, was collecting art. When Procter & Gamble, or the company which acquired Richardson Wicks, the collected art was so much higher in worth at Richardson Wicks that it warranted a mention in their balance sheet. I also found the fact that he was writing, he was reading, he was an opinion maker, and not just a CEO. I've been doing this. Times of India was nice enough to carry an article of mine where I postulated a thesis that STEM to STEAM. My belief is that science, technology, engineering, and math require art to be incorporated in the science and technology for us to have multidimensional and lateral thinkers. Thinkers who are going to go out and make some interesting companies. Scott be damned. Another country that I have been emulating extensively, Israel. We've all been talking about the global forces that we've been hearing about. Labor arbitrage, professional services is really passé right now. For us to really evolve, innovation and thought process is extremely important. I think Israel is an interesting example for all of us to look out in terms of inflection point. A country which is in the throes of war, there's so much of entropy, chaos, and yet it's the startup capital of the world. Pill can, key discs, drip irrigation in the desert area, cherry tomatoes, all have come in from Israel. And for us to really build the country that you've been dreaming about, I think innovation on the lines of Israel is extremely important. This is what I really wanted to highlight. Harvard Business Review talks about it. Harvard was a professor at HBS, and I really don't want to quote it, but that is an area where we perpetually need to look at. It could be as mundane as a young child trying to think how he wants to lead his life. But it's extremely important for all of us not to patronize that child, but to create an environment where we celebrate this whole aspect. I'm still envious. I'm envious of what Google is doing. Much in spite of what was said, there's disruption that's happening. I think Travis Kalanick, Indra Nui actually mentions that every month she reaches out to some of these opinion leaders to understand what's really happening. Facebook is all about democratization of information. Google is genuinely about ubiquity of information. There is an overarching value in what these innovative companies are doing. WhatsApp is not exactly very popular in the US, but out here, I really like the fact how insouciantly every time you see a new feature getting incorporated at WhatsApp. It's become a real platform for many of us to communicate. And then, of course, if some of you have not read Hit Refresh, I strongly recommend you do. I think he's bringing in empathy. He believes scorched earth philosophy is not what we need, something that we are emulating. A quote that I often use, and I found that he's been using it, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we were humbled. We've been invited to some large Microsoft event where we are actually building at our company some very strong world-beating technology. We're using artificial intelligence, we are using IoT, we're using predictive technology, largely to build infrastructure which will lead to a zero-incident framework. Our thesis is that we believe that we do not have to depend on an infrastructure, computer infrastructure, that goes down periodically. And we're using robotics, smart machine. And to be able to do this, we need to bring this inflection point among us. Gartner and Everest, which are two large opinion leaders, have actually rated Gavs along with IBM Watson, Infosys, and others in the area of smart machine and predictive analytics. And this, in my humble opinion, would not happen if we created a culture which is not about irreverence. And that's a contradiction. I think Churchill said it well, that a sign of a good intellect is one who can harbor two conflicting thoughts and yet function productively. I'm sure Aditi feels that when she's trying to build her product, be it in Malaysia or here. We are promoting a concept where we want people to answer back. We want to create an egalitarian environment. And you, the teachers and the professors and the pedagogues, it's extremely, extremely important that we create an environment where people try and think differently. We need to do some disruption. And that's really what we're really trying to do. it's not been hunky-dory all through. I think Lalita said it very well. We all have our scars. We've had our successes, we've had our failures. But this comes handy, where you perpetually ask for serenity to accept things that you cannot change, courage to make some changes, and wisdom to know the difference. My belief, and that's a little bit for you guys, that your success is not really a y is equal to 2x straight up curve. It's really a band. Within that band, you're going to have some inclement weather. You're going to have some disruption. You'll have some challenges, some inconveniences. But broadly, the axis of the world is aligned positively and inclined positively. And that's really how I want to end it. I want to end it with optimism. I would like to bring all of you in to kind of be sensitive to those inflection points. In our day-to-day humdrum, let's think of Elon Musk when he says that it's okay about problem solving. It's okay to do your daily job, but let's do something inspirational, where he talks about that human race is at risk if we only reside on the earth. And it'll be lovely if we could also reside on Mars, so you have two strains of humanity. That is the level of discussion and thought process that India needs. And with that, I'd like to end it. Thank you very much.